my compensation was paid in on the hoof cattle, and I used that, sold some of that, bought some more. And so I had to get out of the cattle business age 18 when I went off to college. But when I look back on it, that was probably my most successful enterprise that I've had throughout my life.
Welcome to the Fueling Deals Podcast, the podcast that teaches how to accelerate your business growth through all types of deals. It's time to fuel up, so buckle in with your host, Corey Kupfer.
There are only two ways to grow your business: organically through sales, marketing, and providing great products and services, and inorganically through deals. Too many companies focus only on the first way, organic growth. Welcome to the podcast in which we help accelerate your business growth inorganically. My guests are a huge variety of deal makers and experts on all types of deals who have personal experience that can help you grow, get clear, learn best practices, and avoid mistakes. We discuss everything from large, complex mergers and acquisitions to smaller deals that you can do even without significant capital. My guest today on the podcast is Phil Buchanan. Phil serves as executive chairman of the board for Buchanan Financial Institute. Phil is one of the most highly sought wealth management experts in America. He has worked with major financial services firms in North America and their subsidiaries abroad as a speaker, trainer, consultant, and coach. Phil, I'm excited to have you on the podcast.
Corey, welcome. It's exciting to be here. I appreciate the opportunity to be a part of it.
So, Phil, you know, you're now executive chairman of the board of a very significant financial services industry firm. But I want to take you back before we talk about that and ask, what did you want to be when you were a little kid? Because my guess is running a financial services firm was probably not in the picture at that point. But correct me if I'm wrong.
No, you're spot on with your analysis. I don't know that there are very many youngsters that looked up at their mom or dad at age 6 and said, "I want to be in wealth management," or "I want to be a consultant," or the like. It's interesting. When I was a young kid, I was fascinated with airplanes and aircraft, and I thought I might be a pilot in the Navy. I thought I might fly jets for Delta. That didn't come about, and it's probably good both for the Navy and the traveling public that I didn't. But this has certainly become my over the years, not just become my passion, but something that I take tremendous intellectual and emotional satisfaction in. It's a fun business to be part of.
Oh, that's great. So before we get to the present, one other question about the past. So what was your first real business, however you describe that?
Actually, my first real business, I guess, was around age 13 or 14. My dad and his brother had what I will describe as a gentleman farm. They raised cattle as a sidebar deal. My dad was a judge. My uncle was the comptroller of a furniture company. But they had this farm, and they were constantly struggling to find laborers. And so I told him, I said, I'd love to work out there, but I don't want you to pay me in cash. What I'd like to have the opportunity to do is to have a piece of the action. I'd like to own some of the cattle, and I actually my compensation was paid in on the hoof cattle, and I used that, sold some of that, bought some more. And so I had to get out of the cattle business age 18 when I went off to college. But when I look back on it, that was probably my most successful enterprise that I've had throughout my life. Beef prices spiked during that period of time. And I probably, in hindsight, would have been financially better off if I'd stuck with that.
Oh, that's funny. I love that story. And, it's interesting because I talked to some other people about bartering, services for equity deals, that they do now. And but you did a deal at that young age to barter services for cattle.
And again, some of those lessons we learned very early in life should follow us the rest of our lives. Maybe that's why I'm involved in some of the things I am today.
All right, so let's talk about that a little bit. Tell us about Buchanan Financial Institute, what it does, and what you're involved in now.
Well, historically, Buchanan has been an educational and consulting firm focused exclusively on the wealth management business. We stick pretty close to those roots today. If you are in the trust business, if you're in the asset management business, the higher end insurance business, be it whether you're going for licensure or you're looking to be more effective with regard to the way that you ply your trade. We design educational programs. We do consulting work with firms and with practices to help them accelerate their learning curve, but also the growth rate of their practices and their firms.
And talk to us just a little bit about, who, in the wealth management industry, those of us in that industry. And as you know, I do a lot of work in that industry. Know that there are a variety of platforms out there, everything from the wirehouses to the independent broker dealers to the totally independent RIA space and various others. So who do you work with along those spectrums?
So let's go back to the initial premise of Buchanan. It started as a trust educational program back in the early 1960s, and between say 1961 and the late 1980s, early part of the 90s, focused exclusively in that space. I joined the firm on a full-time basis in the early 90s, and at one of our first meetings, we made a determination that we were going to become agnostic as to channel. We were going to move away from an express concentration in trust and focus instead on the high-end advisor, whether he or she came from the trust, the broker-dealer, the independent space, the RIA space, the insurance space, et cetera. So today we're fortunate enough to count relationships with brokerage firms like the Morgan Stanleys and the Merrill Lynches of the world, the independent space, the LPLs and the Ceteras of the world, into more of the boutique RIA channel. So again, we're not so much concentrated as a specialist in a vertical, but more in dealing with the high-end, higher net worth client and what it takes to create a very unique experience for those individuals. You know this, Corey, the wealth management space is becoming very commoditized in a lot of ways. I remember when I first got started in this business in the 80s, you could really be distinctive and differentiated with your asset management offer, the platform, your unique proprietary asset strategy. Today, that has been driven to very much of a commoditized offer, and so today everybody that's really championing a differentiated product or differentiated experience is focused on, how do we make a difference in the lives of the clients, not just sell and distribute more product. And that's where we're spending the vast majority of our time.
That's great. So let's talk about, obviously this podcast focuses on inorganic growth and how to do deals to grow your business. So let's tell the Fueling Deals podcast listeners some of your experiences in terms of how you have fueled your business growth or helped other companies fuel their business growth through deals.
Well, it's interesting when you and I connected and had a wonderful initial conversation. It's amazing that you and I have both been in this business as long as we had, and we have just connected. But I decided to go back and recount the transactions I've actually been involved in, either directly or indirectly. And a rough guesstimate is a little over 30 transactions. Either from the formation of newcos that maybe were being spun out of a scenario, and or all the way up to Fortune 100 company transactions of larger deals. And it's amazing when you look back over it, whether you're doing a $2 million deal or a $200 million deal or a $2 billion deal. The basic formula of putting these together, and I'm not talking about the mathematical formula, but the basic formulas and the basic do's and don'ts, they don't shift a lot. They're basic principles that I think apply, and you and I chatted on several of those when we talked. Look forward to walking through those.
Yeah. So let's definitely do that, because listen, 30 deals is a nice sampling, and I'm sure they're all different. And And despite the fact that I know you're a wonderfully successful guy, and I'm sure the far majority of those deals went really well, I'm sure you had some of those that didn't go exactly as you planned, or that you learned some things from. So, yeah, why don't we jump in and talk about, maybe let's start, let's stay out of the deal specific for the moment, but let's go to where you were talking about, where there is these commonalities about across deals, where we've learned some lessons on what works and what doesn't work. So let's start at that higher level and, give me your thoughts.
Okay. Big picture, I think the most important question that a seller or a buyer has to ask and answer with great clarity is, why are we going to do a deal at all? Now, that sounds kind of like a very basic question. You say, duh, but at the end of the day, I see so many firms, I see so many practitioners that want to do a deal. They're rabid about the process, but they really don't have great clarity around that. I've heard scale is a term that gets bannered about quite a bit. That's a driver for a lot of buyers. We want to create scale. We want to grow at a faster rate, and obviously that's a big part of the inorganic message there. For a seller, they will often say, well, I'm looking for an exit strategy, or I want to take some dollars off the table, or we've grown as big as we can grow with the capabilities and the resources that we've got. And in order to, quote unquote, again, scale, we've got to have a partner. But, I think for me, it's critical to evaluate first, how does this deal potentially, because when I say potentially, because it is going to have an impact, but how is the deal going to impact the end user clients of both practices or both firms? That's a question that is very rarely asked, I find, in early analysis of doing a deal. People will often look at the financial metrics. They'll look at the assets under management. They'll look at the revenue. They'll think about expenses that can be reduced through redundancy, et cetera. But at the end of the day, when I look back, and you're right, luckily we're, the situations I've been involved in, the majority of them have worked out in a positive manner for all parties involved. But you're right, there are always going to be some misses. And as I go back to those misses, rarely, if ever, was that question asked. How does this enhance the experience that clients are going to receive? Why will they become raving fans of the combined practice, the combined organization? So for me, starting with that question of how will this eventually impact the client? And then a very close second question is a question of culture. And anytime you do a transaction, and anytime you bring two parties together, whether it's a marriage or whether it's a business deal, there is going to be a perspective that both parties are going to come to the relationship with. And if you don't examine that culture and that potential impact on the constituency parties, if that's not part of the early conversations, you're setting yourself up for a pretty harrowed road down the path.
Yeah, Phil. We discovered this when we connected, and you and I are so aligned on that. And a lot of people think of attorneys, they just come in and document the deal, but these are the kind of questions that I ask my clients, and usually they're coming to me early in the process. And it's exactly right, because any of us who have done a lot of deals, what we find is, and listen, I'm not going to discount the value of having a great legal agreement and making sure the business structure is right and the money flows right, and the governance of the joint entity, if it's a merger or acquisition is decided upon, and whatever. But the point is, you can do all those. I could write the best agreement in the world. We can be clear on how the money flows, etc. But if people aren't clear about their why, if they don't have a shared vision, if the cultures don't work together, all of that's going to be meaningless.
You're exactly right. And if we break it right down to brass tacks, the worst deals that I've ever seen, and you never know that it's a bad deal truly until after the fact, and you're months and even years down the line. But the very worst deals that I've ever seen in retrospect all began with poor alignment on culture and not a really good purpose behind why the deal is being done, other than it adds assets or other than it had the potential to add revenue. So the cultural issue and asking some of those questions up front, very critical. After that, you made the comment about the legal agreement and the structures and things like that, and of course that's always an important part. But again, I've never seen deals truly go terrible on finances alone. Sure, sometimes it didn't generate what you thought it was going to generate, and it didn't hit quite the way you thought it was going to hit. But it wasn't just the financial side of it that caused that to go sour. There was usually some other misalignment.
Well, that's right. And listen, one of the things I always say on the legal documents is I say, listen, ideally, and I've been doing this long enough where I used to say you put them in a file cabinet as opposed to, saving them digitally on a computer. But what I say to people is, listen, there's really two purposes to do the legal agreements right and get the deal right. One is so that the one people think about. So if something goes wrong later on and there's a roadmap as to who has what rights, and hopefully you have a roadmap as to dealing with all the potential situations that can come up, even a split of a business partnership or people want out or whatever it is. But the second one is the process of going through doing agreements right helps the parties make sure there's what us lawyers call a meeting of the minds, meaning that they've really, I've seen many situations where people think they're aligned on a deal. But when you go through the documentation process, you realize there's some things they didn't think about or they didn't detail. And if you do that right, it really helps them get to that point where there's a true understanding, mutual understanding of the deal. And then, like I said, in the old days, I used to say, well, hopefully you're going to put that agreement in a file cabinet, or nowadays, save it in a digital file and never look at it again. Because the only time you pull that agreement, that agreement out, is if there's a problem with the business relationship.
Very true. You're exactly right. And it's funny, you bring up a point right there. I was actually in a conversation with a person that's undergoing a review of a transaction right now, and there are a couple of different bidders, as it were, for the company. And so he was talking about some of the terms and things that were involved, and he said, "So what do you think?" And I said, at the end of the day, I don't think the difference in those terms actually matter as much as who you're going to want to be in business with and want to partner with over the next 36 to 60 months. Pick that and the money will work itself out. If people do it just based on the transaction metrics and there's not that alignment, they may get paid exactly what they anticipated they were going to get paid, but it will not be a joyous experience. I think I shared this with you when we chatted. I remember telling my dad at I don't know, I was 19, 20, I was going to have this great career and I was going to make all this money. And, at 19, you're 10 foot tall and bulletproof. And I remember him making the comment. He said, son, my experience is do what you love and the money will follow you. But if you do something just for the money, you're always going to be tied to that role. And he was exactly right in that. And a lot of these deals that you hear about, the rumor mill of what the structures are and the like, it sounds wonderful on its surface, but if there's not a tremendous amount of alignment on how the bringing together of those groups, those organizations, those practices, those firms, of what that's going to mean to an end user client and why that end user client is going to become more of a raving fan and an advocate of that combined organization. That's I would really question the thought process behind doing those types of transactions, unless you just have to do a deal. Now, we've all been parts of situations where people, for financial reasons, health reasons, and others, they had to do a transaction. Okay, I get that, but we are definitely in a mode right now where there are a lot of buyers out there. There's a lot of money looking at deals, and I just don't want to see our industry fall into that trap of having done the deal and then suffer through a misalignment of culture, which is going to create negative client experiences. It's going to create negative internal conflict between the joined organizations, which leads to attrition, client dissatisfaction, all those other types of things that we've all seen down the line. So again, that front end piece, so vital, so critical.
So, Phil, I'd love to hear a little bit more about some of the types of deals you've done and what the strategic value of those were, and maybe if there's some of the lessons you've learned along the way, just so the audience can get an idea of because I find that a lot of people, when they think about deals, they automatically just think about mergers and acquisitions, and those are great deals and tuck-ins and that kind of stuff. But, there are all types of deals out there. There are deals where you hire people and, may be positioned out to the marketplace as an acquisition, but it's really a hire with some sort of incentive. There are, in other industries outside our industry, or even, potentially you doing education stuff. I don't know if you've done any licensing, but there are deals like that. There's strategic alliances, joint ventures in the wealth management industry. There are sub-advisor relationships. There's, referral relationships. There's so many different types of deals that firms can do. And I think sometimes people who don't do deals have a limited view of what deals are.
Well, you said something so important right there. In my way of thinking, a deal, quote unquote, can take any and all of the examples that you talked about, and some of the more successful deals that I've actually witnessed have been scenarios where there are, if you will, small lift outs. And again, this goes back to the purpose of why you wish to do a deal. And so I'll give you a couple of examples where I've been directly involved in recent months and years that really turned the tide. So you're part of an organization, and you're strongly established in a certain marketplace. You've got the capacity to grow. You've got the capital to grow, and you don't want to go into a marketplace necessarily de novo. But what you're not looking to do is to create, a huge capital strain on your entity. One of the smartest things that you can do there is to go in and make a strategic hire to establish in a new marketplace. So you're in XYZ city. You want to be in ABC city. How do you go about doing that? One of the things that I would encourage people to think about, if that's truly an objective they've got, is usually that first deal, that first transaction, that first hire in a new marketplace needs to carry what I call a level of gravitas to it, because I've seen both sides of this. I've seen firms go into a marketplace and they won't go in and take the really, really big leap. They'll go in and quietly acquire a tier 2 or a tier 3 practice, or do a lift out, or do a hire. And again, it's a tier 2 or it's a tier 3, and it makes almost zero splash. It doesn't catch anybody's attention. And when I say anybody's attention, I mean the competitor marketplace, but I also mean the client marketplace, because many times those tier 2 and tier 3 practices, they don't have the top tier quality clientele that are part of it. They don't have the thriving reputation. They don't have the growth engine behind it. And so the situations that I've seen there that have been more successful have been when you do go after the more successful practices, and you may even pay a bit of a premium for that first opportunity to establish that brand, to establish that track record. Because really what you're trying to do, my experience, and going into a new market like that, is you're buying reputation. You're establishing yourself, you're establishing your firm, but you're taking the reputation of that experienced practitioner, that experienced practice, and adding it in and folding it in under your umbrella. And that does a couple of things. Number one, that gets you established in that marketplace, and hopefully with a positive and accretive cash flow. But the second thing that it does is it alerts the other potential joiners of the practice down the line that you're very serious about that marketplace, that you're willing to make that level of investment. And so I would, just as a lesson learned, is when you're coming into a new marketplace, come into that marketplace, be forward leaning, take your time, do your diligence, and be willing to invest what's necessary to make that type of transaction. I don't know if you've seen something similar in your experience, or maybe even something different.
No. I absolutely think it's brilliant advice, and I 100% agree with it. And then the interesting part is just to follow through on what you're saying is those, tier two firms, which may be, that are not the right firms to be the initial firm to give you the gravitas and establish yourself in the market. Those are great firms to then tuck in and acquire, on the second, third, and fourth deal, because there are a lot of quality firms out there that are doing, great work for clients, but they don't necessarily have the reputation, they don't have the scale, they don't have the systems, et cetera. And, what you do is on those deals, that's not your first deal, but it could be your second, third, and fourth deal.
That's exactly right. That is exactly right. And the other thing that you've got at that point in time is you've got an established reputation. You now know that marketplace. You've got the ability to separate the wheat from the chaff, as it were. And you're usually, at least my own personal experience, you're usually much more effective and efficient in your second and third deal in a region than you are that first deal. At times can be a little noisy. Sometimes it's a little messier than the successive deals, but it's in that initial transaction that reputation's really established. So I love your follow up thoughts right there. So that's an example of a scenario that we've worked within. Another is when there's an opportunity based on a variety of factors involved, and for example, we were blocked in this conversation earlier this week with a client of ours. There are a lot of firms today that are making the strategic decision to exit certain lines of business. And I'm talking, usually these are, well-established, very often public companies. And sometimes they've got a line of business that they're not interested in continuing. Perhaps they're wanting to shop it. And there are a couple of ways to obviously pursue that. Number one is to work out a transaction with that organization. Number two is to hire the principals that are involved in running that piece of business, and that's something that I have seen some practices use to establish themselves in certain unique verticals by taking advantage of people wanting to exit a line of business, and usually again it's larger institutions that through different mergers and acquisitions they've been a part of, they're at a station where they're wanting to be leaner, they're wanting to be more targeted, more focused, and they've got a unit that just doesn't fit. That can be a very unique transaction, and I would encourage people to, Corey, the term that I use is always take the meeting. If somebody says, hey, could we have a conversation on this? I'm always going to take that meeting, even if it's not something that I think I'm going to be interested in. Just the opportunity to learn what's happening. There have been, as I think back on it, probably a half a dozen or so situations where I've been involved in some of those initial conversations, recognizing that it might not be right in one client scenario or one firm scenario, but being able to put together a situation in which maybe there's another firm that could be a player or a joint venture, as you mentioned earlier. I think the creativity that is available through some of these opportunities can really be accretive to a lot of practices and bring to them perhaps business lines and revenue streams that are not directly correlated, which in volatile economic environments sometimes can be a very nice thing to have non-correlated revenue streams.
Absolutely. And, it's interesting to me. I love the use the word creativity. And I love that because I find that sometimes business people and certainly lawyers get stuck into structures they know. And the truth is that, there's various types of deals and they don't even have to fall into a defined bucket. I mean, I've done some really interesting structures for people and you can create them. And, and in many industries, you're really free to do whatever you want. I mean, obviously in the wealth management space, it is a regulated area. So there are some certain, things that apply that might restrict certain activities. But still, even within that, there's significant creativity in the types of deals that you can do.
Yeah, that is very true. And again, at the end of the day, I think it takes people who are willing to explore options, and that's what creativity is all about. It's identifying options and building a deal that is workable for all parties involved.
Great.
Today, I think you've probably seen this. I think there's a general sense among a lot of sellers that their business or their book of business or their company carries with it in their own mind a certain value that may exceed the capability or creativity of a lot of people to do a deal. I gave this explanation recently. I don't know if you watch HGTV, but there are two guys in there called the Property Brothers, and they'll go out and they'll buy a house and they'll fix it up for a family. And I was looking at something the other day, and they said, to remodel the kitchen is going to be $1,200. To remodel the bath is going to be $1,000. Landscaping is going to be $600. And I was sitting there, I was listening to those numbers, and I was like, well, that sounds great, but in reality, if you're talking about remodeling a kitchen for $1,200, what you're really talking about is putting on a coat of paint. And unfortunately, a lot of times, people will hear numbers or they'll hear multiples, and they're thinking, wow, we'll get a check for X amount. They start calculating their tax on that, and now they've got this pile of money. And my experience is that that's very rarely reality for what happens for a lot of these people. So again, expectations and creativity, you've got to come to the table with an open mind.
Yeah, absolutely. And listen, sometimes deal structure can bridge some of those gaps. For example, using earnouts if they think, hey, the value is not high enough because we're in a growth mode, and of course the buyer often doesn't want to pay for future growth that's not guaranteed. You can use things like earnouts to get around it, but sometimes, people just have a very unrealistic expectation of what their practice, their firm, their company is worth, and they got to get more realistic before you can bridge a gap and get a deal done.
Corey, you mentioned a term that is definitely a lesson learned for me, and that term is earnouts. I'm a big fan of earnouts. Now, in full disclosure, the majority of the transactions that I've been involved in over the years have been involved on the acquiring side, the purchaser side, and so in a lot of instances, purchasers do like to do the earnouts, particularly if they're wanting to ensure that the principals continue to be involved and they want to create a great client experience. But again, I think it is that structure of the earnout that keeps parties engaged and ensures that we focus on client retention, that we minimize attrition. I don't know that you and I haven't talked about this. I don't know your perspective as a structuring attorney. Is that always always is a terrible term, shouldn't use that. Is that generally something that you suggest to your acquiring clients, or does it just go deal to deal?
Yeah, I mean, it's a little deal to deal, but frankly, it's very often at least a portion of the deal. There's usually some amount of money down. There may be some amount of money paid over time, and in the form of a note where it's just an installment payment. But it's I'd say in more often than not, there's at least a component of the deal that has some sort of earnout piece of it for the various reasons that you mentioned. No question. So what I love is obviously your experiences deals mainly in the financial services wealth management industry. I do a lot of work in that industry, but I also do work in various other industries. And our listeners, we have a lot of listeners in the wealth management space, but we also have listeners, in other spaces. And what I love is everything that we've talked about, even though the examples are in wealth management, they really apply to any other types of deals. Certainly in other service businesses, you can apply them across the board. So I think there are lessons in there for people in any type of business looking to do deals.
Corey, I think you're exactly right. In my experience, I call it the principles of relationships, and principles of relationships apply to any transaction, whether it's the tech space, the pharmaceutical space, the financial services space. A transaction is going to be based on the relationships between the principals involved, the buyers and the sellers. It's going to be based upon the relationships of the combined employees and stakeholders owners of the new entity post acquisition. It's going to be based on the relationship that the clients of the combined firm ultimately have with that new organization or that combined organization. And so if you focus on ensuring that transactions at least have the propensity to be accretive to all parties, that people will gain from that, that's when the best transactions take place. Probably the worst transaction that I've ever experienced is when a group wanted to be acquired, thought that they were going to be able to get greater distribution of what they were doing, but really had no interest to fit within the culture of the acquiring organization. As a matter of fact, almost demanded that they be left alone, but have ready access to all of the client-facing professionals of the new organization. And it was an early transaction for the buying group, and so they had yet to learn some of the tougher lessons that you learn down the line. The financial structure was a pretty good structure. The legal documents were fantastic, but they never got the right alignment as to why they were doing the deal and what the expectations were of all parties post transaction. And that deal actually had to be unwound with a sale back, a few years down the line. And I don't know that anybody was really satisfied with that one.
Yeah, it's unfortunate when that happens, and usually it's for reasons where, in hindsight, you actually realize what wasn't done up front to protect against that or determine that maybe it wasn't the right deal in the first place. So that's always interesting. One of the things as I said, our discussion up until this point really applies across industries. I do want to, because you have such extensive experience in the wealth management space, I do want to ask a specific question on that in terms of what you see, because, we have, it's really been a maturing and evolving space, right? A lot more private equity, venture capital money coming in, funded firms. Of course, you got Focus Financial going public, other firms that are potentially looking to IPO, consolidation, bigger firms, in place, aggregators, all these things that you didn't have in the industry back when you and I started in it. So I just wonder whether you have any sort of macro views on how the industry is evolving. Whatever comes to mind. I mean, I always find maturing industries very interesting, and there are real good things about it, and then there are some things that come into question, like whether these funding companies can maintain deal discipline and do the right deal still. So that I don't want to limit your thoughts. I'd just love to get your thoughts on the changing landscape in the wealth management industry.
Well, first off, it's complex. That's a term that I would use right now. I mean, go through. You probably described a dozen or more participants in transactions right now, and the lens by which each of those participants looks at a deal is going to be different. I think. Well, there's several things at play. Number one. Don't discount or undervalue the role technology is playing in the wealth management space today. Tremendous amount of I was about to say disruptive, and then I got destructive came out, and I was like, well, either of those terms might be applicable depending upon the situation.
Right.
But no, technology is really enhancing potentially the ability of the wealth management industry from both an efficiency standpoint and a profitability standpoint. And I think that's where a lot of the players see the opportunity today, and I think that's why there's a lot of money chasing deals, particularly with some of the private equity scenarios that you talked about. It's creating something kind of unique, though, and you know this very well, having done a number of deals that you've done. Most of these private equity organizations, the funds that they put together. Kind of their whole business thesis is, they're going to have a 7 to 10 year turn on that particular fund or that investment. And sometimes the window is a bit shorter than that. So they're looking for a pop. They're looking for increased growth, and so they're placing a lot of emphasis, a lot of pressure on that. One of the things that I've always struggled with the wealth management space, particularly some of the larger publicly traded organizations, is the inability of some of these firms to look beyond the quarterly earnings calls that their CEOs have to do with the analysts because of the impact that call is going to have ultimately on the share price of the organization. And, the tighter the window, the less creative sometimes organizations can be, the less patient organizations can be. And if there's one term that I've heard time and time again from many of the private equity people is we're very patient money. We're very patient money. Well, they're patient money until, we're getting close to the time that they're going to need to do a transaction. So you're right. It does bring a certain level of complexity to the table with regard to how many of these deals are getting put together, how they're getting funded, and what the time horizon for the next step or next evolution in some of those practices and firms are going to be. I mentioned this earlier. We're at a time where the value proposition of a pure asset management play has been diminished from what it was when you and I first got in this business. Today, you've driven the value of asset management somewhere down in the 20 to 30 basis points range, whereas when you and I first got started in this business, it was 100 basis points plus. And so, today these firms they've got greater competition. You've got technology's input. The value proposition has been disrupted somewhat. You've got different clients that are coming on down the line who have very different expectations about what it means to deal with a financial advisor. My parents had an advisor, and they would meet with that advisor 4 times a year, and they would have this big summary year-end meeting, and it usually involved a meal, et cetera. And I look at my 22-year-old who's about to graduate college and get started in her career. Not that she's got a lot of money or is going to have high incomes and things like that, but she's going to have a tremendously different expectation because she was raised in the day and age of technology and Skype and FaceTime and the ability to log on at all hours of the day and interact and use text messaging and emails to ask questions. She doesn't want to go and sit down and have 4 meetings a year and a big due diligence review. She wants to be advised and counsel on her terms, not the terms of the firm. So you've got a lot of complexity that is shaking up the industry right now, and I don't know that there is a pat answer of where this thing ultimately shakes out. I've been tasked with giving a speech in early March entitled "Wealth Management 2030," and the premise of the talk supposedly is what the wealth management industry could look like in the year 2030. So when I was asked to do this, it was October of this past year, and I got off the phone with the person that asked me to give this talk, and I said, okay. So I grabbed my iPhone, and I was riding in the back of an Uber at this point in time on the way to the airport. I grabbed my iPhone, and I Googled the year 2006, which was 12 years prior to the time that I was being asked to give this talk about what the industry could look like 12 years forward. And so then I put innovations since 2006. And I sat there and I started chuckling, Corey, because I was using an iPhone that was not introduced until 2007 to research this issue while sitting in the back of an Uber car, which didn't come along to 2009 and 2010. And I was being asked to think about what our industry could look like 12 years in the future while taking advantage of all the changes that have taken place in just the past 12 years. So that's where that creativity and open mind is really going to be paramount. And, there are a lot of firms that will swear that they've got the the lens and the crystal ball as to where that will be. And I think we've got to, as practitioners and business owners and strategists and partners to the industry, I think we've got to be very, very open-minded and pretty nimble as we shift through these coming months and years.
Well, no question about it. I always say that whenever there's an evolution, whether it's technology, whether it's cultural, whether it's whatever it is, that there are companies that are on the cutting edge of it. There are companies that come along in time, and then there are companies that don't. And we have many examples, inside but also outside of this of the wealth management industry, where major companies just didn't respond in time, and they're no longer around. I mean, Sears is on the verge of bankruptcy. Blockbuster is a million examples, right? So I think that's right on. In your thinking, I mean, the ability to be nimble, because nobody has a crystal ball, but at the same time, you got to be up on the trends, and you got to be able to adjust and understand where the market and your clients are taking you.
Yeah, and not only that, but to be somewhat active and somewhat invested in continually growing your knowledge curve and participation in that future innovation. I think about the taxi cab industry, and I think about the hotel industry. When the taxi cab industry should have reacted by probably trying to acquire Uber or Lyft, they instead went to regulators to try to quell that competitive threat. And consumers voted with they didn't vote with their feet. They voted nor their pocketbook. They voted with their iPhones and Androids. They voted with their thumbs. They went with it.
They voted with their thumbs.
That's exactly right. And the exact same thing has happened in the overnight business. If you want to go to Atlanta, Georgia to the Super Bowl in a couple of weeks, the hotels are sold out, but you can go on Airbnb, you can go on VRBO, and you can rent a room, you can rent a house, and there'll be more people in rented homes and rented rooms in homes in Atlanta during the Super Bowl than will probably be in the hotels, because again, the hotels had an opportunity to make that acquisition, but instead they went a different direction. And if I could encourage our industry to do one thing, is to ensure that they've got principals of the firms and the organizations they're a part of these think tanks, that are part of conversations like this, where they're actively involved in examining, how can we create a better environment for clients, not just how can we keep the 100 basis points or whatever the revenue stream is in the firm today, how we can keep that intact. Because, the innovators and the disruptors are the ones that took the Sears, and they took the Blockbusters, and they took the taxi cab industries, and they totally blew them away. And I think the same thing has the possibility to happen in our industry. So we've all got to be innovators.
This has been great, Phil. Before I ask you my final question, I'm sure that my Fueling Deals podcast listeners have gotten a huge amount of value from you on the show. So I want to make sure they know where to find out more about you, where to reach you, and also about your phenomenal podcast.
Oh, well, sure, and thank you, and I look forward to having you as a guest on as well. I'm involved actually in 3 podcasts, a weekly podcast called Monday Morning Mojo. It's geared for kind of a kickstart to the week for people that are client-facing professionals. I do a leadership podcast entitled Buchanan Curve, and as a response to listeners to both of those podcasts who write in with questions, comments, etc., we entertain their questions, and sometimes have those listeners who come with their questions join us live on a monthly podcast called First Friday Feedback. If you're interested in connecting with us, our website is Cannon, CANNON, financial.com. And of course, I'm on Twitter and on LinkedIn, and would love to be engaged with any of your listeners. But again, look, it's been a pleasure to be a part of this, and I look forward to having you on the Cannon Curve very soon.
Well, I look forward to that as well, and listeners will have all of Phil's contact information in the show notes as well, if you didn't catch it now, so you can look there. So, Phil, my final question that I always ask on the podcast is, authenticity is something that I believe in. It's very important to me, and it's not just about, for me, authenticity is something beyond just ethics and and that kind of stuff. But it's really this conversation of making sure you run your life and your business and the deals you do and the people you work with based upon something that aligns with your inner truth, with your values. And, we alluded a little bit on this when we started talking about the why at the beginning of the, of the podcast. So I'd be curious, what do you do to make sure that your decisions you make in business and also the way you advise others is coming from a place of authenticity?
Well, there are two things that come to mind in that question. The comment on authenticity. A good friend of mine by the name of Kyle McDonald gave me a term several years ago that has always struck a chord with me, and the term that he gave was humble confidence, and I think that's an important characteristic or trait that I look for in people that I try to portray and live a life with. Humility, being of service to others, but at the same time, a confidence level in your own skills and abilities and that of your organization to make a difference in the lives of others. So, to focus on that issue of authenticity and to stay true to course and to vision. I'm a big believer in what Jim Rome said. You're an amalgamation of the 5 people you spend the most time with. Be careful who you spend time with. I've really taken that to heart over the years. So I look back on certain periods of my life where maybe I made a deal or a decision. I got influenced by something. It usually was, not one of those top 5 people, and I was usually maybe influenced too much by something that maybe I shouldn't have been influenced by. But at the end of the day, I go back to what I said earlier. How is this going to impact all of the stakeholders? Not just how's it going to be a good deal for Phil or for Buchanan or for whatever company I'm involved in, but how does this impact the people? And if it's in a positive way, then we're acting in the right way. The actors are involved. They're gonna do the right thing. If it's done purely to exploit an opportunity, and there's anguish or there's downside to somebody being involved, the money might work, but at the end of the day, you're going to have a lot worse trouble. Last night, Brian Kemp, who has been recently sworn in as the new governor of the state of Georgia, he told a group of his constituents, he said, we're going to work hard to make you proud. We'll do that in the light of day, and we'll do that when nobody's watching. And I think that's one of the most important things of authenticity. It's what you do when people aren't watching. And if you constantly use that as a reminder for how you evaluate what you're doing in business, I think you usually come out okay.
That's fantastic. Phil, I want to thank you again for being on the show. It's been such a pleasure having you.
Corey, it's been mine as well. Thank you.
And thank you, Fueling Deals listeners, for tuning in. Remember, there's only one difference between companies that grow inorganically and those that don't. And it's unrelated to size, amount of capital, or any other factor, other than that the owners and executives of companies that do deals make a decision to do deals, and then they take action. It's time to refuel. So until next week, Corey Kupfer signing out.
Thank you again for tuning in. Be sure to leave Fueling Deals a rating and review on iTunes and Google. Check out all our episodes at fuelingdeals.com to find out more resources to accelerate your business growth.